Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking the Paranormal, the podcast of the spooky, the weird, and the strange. I am your host, Carrie, and if this is your first time joining me, I do appreciate you checking out the show. You are actually listening to a spooky summer series episode. I have been sharing travel stories where people encounter paranormal things while they are vacationing on the road, whether it's staying at an Airbnb, a hotel, a cabin, or even camping out in the woods. Because people are traveling a lot during the summertime, and this is when people often take vacations, I thought it would be the perfect time to share these stories. And today, that journey continues with even more unsettling stories from places that people visit to relax, escape, and make memories. So, settle in for another mini episode of the Spooky Summer series. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel that there is always a little uncertainty when staying in an Airbnb for the first time. Unlike a hotel, you're stepping into a home that belongs or once belonged to someone else. You know almost nothing about its history or the people that have passed through its doors. And honestly, for me, it's just a little weird because you're in someone else's space and you're very unfamiliar with it. One family's first experience with Airbnb seemed perfect on paper. It's a remote cabin in the woods where they could watch the solar eclipse away from the crowds. But before the trip was over, a series of strange events left them wondering whether they had been sharing the cabin with an unseen guest. Now, this is a story that was shared by a Reddit user. They shared an unsettling experience that occurred during what was supposed to be a relaxing family getaway. It was shared about 2 years ago by Altruistic Flight 266. It was their first time renting an Airbnb. It's a secluded 3-bedroom cabin that was tucked away in a remote area. The family had traveled there specifically to watch the solar eclipse, expecting a quiet retreat surrounded by nature. But it didn't take long for strange things to happen. On the first day, while everyone was gathered in the kitchen, a loud crash echoed from one of the front bedrooms. It sounded as though something heavy had fallen onto the floor. Curious, they immediately went to investigate, but the bedroom was completely undisturbed. Nothing had fallen and nothing appeared out of place. Now, this incident was easy enough to dismiss, but the following night brought another surprise. This Reddit user's oldest daughter mentioned that when the family had first arrived at the cabin, she thought she had seen a dark shadow dart from the living area into the kitchen. At the time, she hadn't said anything, assuming it was a simple trick of the light or her imagination, or she was just tired. Then came the third day. While the oldest daughter and her boyfriend were exploring the wooded area surrounding the cabin, this Reddit user stepped outside onto the back deck and called out her daughter's name. Almost immediately, a voice answered. Clear as day, it sounded as though her daughter was literally standing just around the corner of the cabin, no more than 10 feet away. Hello, we'll be right there. Now, something about this response felt off to the Reddit user. The wording sounded strangely unnatural enough that they instinctively called out, asking what they were doing. Just then, her husband had stepped out onto the deck and called their daughter's name as well. The Reddit user was about to tell him there was no need. She thought their daughter was just around the other side of the cabin. But before she could speak, she looked up. There, on the opposite side of the property, she saw her daughter and her boyfriend emerging from the woods, high on a steep hillside, hundreds of feet away. There was no possible way the voice she had just heard was coming from them. The instant realization sent chills down her spine. Fortunately for her, only one night remained of the family's stay, and nothing else unusual occurred before they left the cabin. Even so, the experience lingered. What was meant to be a peaceful vacation had become a very unsettling mystery, one that left this person wondering whether the voice on the deck had truly belonged to someone or something else. Since then, they've found themselves looking at vacation rentals a little bit differently. They still want to travel and explore new places, but after this experience, the thought of spending the night in a stranger's home and in another Airbnb comes with an uneasy question. Who or what might already be there waiting? Honestly, this is the perfect story for anyone who has never stayed at an Airbnb before. If this was you, would you stay at another Airbnb or would you just stick to hotels or inns from here on out? I obviously love the paranormal, so that definitely would not discourage me from staying at another Airbnb, but perhaps some of my family members wouldn't agree with me and wouldn't feel the same. Now, with this story, the first thing that I thought of as far as what they encountered was a mimic. Something was mimicking her daughter's voice and it sounded just like her. And she simply just didn't see where the voice was coming from or what it was coming from. So, was it just a disembodied voice that she had heard that was being mimicked? Or was there something else right around the corner that she just couldn't see? Okay, if you have had your own mimic encounter or something similar to this, you definitely need to send me the story. You can email it to unlockingtheparanormalpod@gmail.com, or you can call the hotline and leave a voicemail. The phone number will be in the show notes. Traveling doesn't always mean staying at an Airbnb or a hotel. Sometimes it means looking after someone else's home while they are away. It can seem like the perfect arrangement. It's a quiet place to yourself and a chance to enjoy a change of scenery. But again, there's something very unsettling about spending the night alone in a house that just isn't yours. You don't know every sound that the home makes. You don't know the surrounding woods or area or wildlife. You don't know the history of the property. And when something unusual happens in the middle of the night, it's hard to know whether there's a perfectly rational explanation or you're experiencing something far more disturbing. One person learned that firsthand while house sitting a secluded home high in the mountains of Colorado. Now, what began as a quiet night alone quickly turned into an ordeal they say they will never forget. Even years later, they still remember the overwhelming fear of hearing footsteps outside in the darkness, accompanied by this unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged behind them. This was shared from a girl named Katie, and Katie had titled the story A Scary Night House Sitting in the Mountains of Colorado. And this is what she shared. I was house sitting in the mountains of Colorado by myself when I was awoken at 1 a.m. by the sound of someone or something walking loudly outside and dragging something that sounded like a chain. As time went on, it got louder and more frequent. And then I heard whatever this thing was starting to run. I rang 911, but it was way out in the mountains. It took 45 minutes for them to arrive. And during that time, whatever was making the noises outside was getting louder and closer. The cops finally arrived and did a perimeter inspection. They found something unusual outside and called me out to take a look at it. A long drag mark in the gravel they couldn't explain. They also heard something moving away from them in the forest when they did a second walk around the outside. They told me it was probably a mountain lion, but didn't explain the chain or the fact that it sounded exactly like a human walking and running. Maybe mountain lions sound like that, but I was not convinced. The cops left around 4 a.m., and I didn't get any sleep until it started getting light out. I had trouble sleeping by myself for months after my experience, and I will never do such a secluded house sit by myself ever again. It's been 4 years, but I still remember the absolute fear I felt, and I'm afraid that one day I will hear the footsteps and dragging again. And then I would know for sure that it wasn't a mountain lion or a human, but something unexplained. That is my greatest fear of all. So I myself have never heard any other stories where someone is encountering something where it sounds like a chain. Footsteps, perhaps, yes, but not necessarily a chain being dragged. I mean, I've been to Colorado a few times, but I don't think that I am familiar enough with Colorado to know if that makes any kind of sense to hear that out in the mountains or not. So if you live in Colorado or near any kind of mountains, is that a normal sound that a person would just hear in the middle of the night? What's weird to me is that this person explained that they heard sounds of walking and then running, and it sounds like it was getting closer, and yet they never saw anything. They never actually witnessed what was making that noise. You would think that if it was close enough for her to hear it, she would have eventually been able to see whatever it was. To me, that almost makes it seem like it was a disembodied noise that she was experiencing. But I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you make of this story? Share your feedback, share your comments. Let me know. You can post your comments on Spotify. You can post your comments on the episode social media post, or you can email me. Again, the email is unlockingtheparanormalpod@gmail.com. I actually have another story I would like to share on today's episode. So far with this spooky summer series, I have talked about haunted hotels, Airbnbs, bed and breakfast, cabins, and even camping trips out in the woods. But what about cruise ships? Every year, millions of people board these floating cities expecting a relaxing vacation. Yet, among the crew who spend months living there, stories circulate about certain areas of the ship where strange things happen after hours. Now, whether they're nothing more than rumors or something far more unsettling is truly up for debate. But one former crew member says they experienced firsthand why some ships earn a haunted reputation. So, again, with this story, it's not necessarily somebody is on vacation on the cruise ship, but people do vacation here all the time. So, I thought it would be perfect to share this within the Spooky Summer series and on today's episode. So, this was actually shared from a girl named Michelle, and this is what she had to say about her experience. When I first started working on a cruise ship, I was warned that some vessels were more haunted than others. It was speculated that this was due to former guests or crew members who passed away while on board. In any case, one of the larger ships I worked on had 2 decks dedicated to the kids' club, which was where I worked. As children would start getting picked up by their families, we would begin to close different sections and fewer staff members would be required to stay behind. On the night that I was scheduled to leave last, I was working on the lower deck of the children's area. All the kids in the upstairs section had been picked up, so my coworker closed all of the rooms, locked the main entrance doors, and turned off all the lights before leaving for the night. However, about 30 minutes later, I heard footsteps coming from above. The only thing above me was the kids' facilities, which had already been closed. I thought it was odd, but I figured maybe a staff member had returned to get something. As the last kid in my care was picked up, I kept hearing footsteps coming from upstairs. I went up to check, but there was no one there. Every room was still locked and all the lights were off. I told some friends later on, and they said multiple staff members had similar encounters in the same area. At that point, it was just known among everyone that there was a ghost who had made its home in that room. The creepiest occurrence was when the ship's security team called a staff member in the kids' center to ask why there was a child left unattended late one night, as they saw a kid on the live security footage alone without supervision. The entire area had already been closed for the night, but was checked again due to the phone call. And it was the same scene. All the lights were off, every door locked, and no children to be found. The idea of a child spirit, yes, it used to creep me out, but now that I'm a mom myself and have a young toddler, anytime I hear stories about children's spirits, really it just makes me kind of sad more than anything. It definitely would be a very eerie sight to see a ghost spirit on security footage and even to hear them playing and running around. No, the kid's spirit just wasn't done playing for the day, I guess. What do you all make of that last story? Have any of you ever been on a cruise and experienced something paranormal? Think that it would be really fun to do a themed episode. So if you have any good paranormal or weird encounters on a cruise ship, again, email it to me at unlockingtheparanormalpod@gmail.com, or you can call the hotline and leave a voicemail. That is actually it for today's episode. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts on these stories. And if you've ever experienced anything strange while traveling, while staying at a hotel, an Airbnb, a bed and breakfast, don't forget to share your stories with me. You never know, you might even hear it featured in a future episode of the Spooky Summer series. And if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss a new deep dive into the paranormal. I actually have longer episodes where I researched paranormal topics coming out this fall, so you definitely want to follow along so you do not miss those. Don't forget to check out my social media for additional creepy content. I am on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you again for listening to Unlocking the Paranormal. And as always, stay curious.